We also need Congress to make the changes to fix the broken immigration system here at home. My team is working with Senate Democrats and Republicans to try to find a bipartisan compromise, both in terms of changes in policy and provide the resources we need to secure the border. Compromise is how democracy works, and I'm ready and offered compromise already. Holding Ukraine funding hostage in an attempt to force through an extreme Republican partisan agenda on the border is not how it works.
He's about to support an extreme Republican agenda at the border. That's how it works. How do we know this? Well, new reporting indicates that Biden wants military funding for Ukraine and Israel so badly that he is in fact willing to give into the anti-immigration demands of Republicans to get it. Now, at least that's how the press is framing the whole situation. But I would venture to say that the framing is inaccurate. I would frame it entirely differently, because my read of this situation is that Joe Biden wants these hardline policies at the border, because whether you want to accept it or not, we do have a broken immigration system. And as a result, we are in fact dealing with a migrant crisis. And it's unfair to the migrants, and it's unfair to the local communities that are trying to find shelter and resources for the migrants as they come in. Now, this has turned into a giant political liability for Joe Biden, especially in areas of the country that are typically thought of as Democratic strongholds. These are communities that are most affected by what's happening with the migrant crisis. So I believe that what Joe Biden is doing here is pretending like, I had no choice but to engage in these negotiations and compromise with Republicans because I really wanted that military funding for Ukraine and Israel. So let's back up and give you the full context. The White House indicated that it would support a new, far-reaching legal authority to allow US border officials to summarily expel migrants without processing their asylum claims. The measure would effectively revive the Trump-era Title 42 pandemic order and allow officials to pause US asylum law without a public health justification. Okay, I'm not even sure he would be able to do that. Remember, the reason why they ended Title 42 was because the coronavirus pandemic was considered officially over. And so Title 42 was challenged in the courts, and the courts are like, yeah, there's no public health emergency, you gotta wrap this up. So I'm curious to see how this all plays out. Can they just re-implement Title 42 without a pandemic, without any kind of public health issue? And it'll just stay that way? We'll see. The administration would also back a nationwide expansion of a process known as expedited removal that allows immigration officials to deport migrants without court hearings if they don't ask for asylum or if they fail their initial asylum interviews. So it's a way of fast tracking people who they don't believe would qualify for asylum and getting them out of the country. But it gets even more ugly, okay? So moreover, the White House would be willing to mandate the detention of certain migrants who are allowed into the country pending the adjudication of their claims. It's unclear how this provision would work since the US government has never had the detention space to detain all migrants who cross into the country illegally. I know how it's gonna work out. I know exactly how it's gonna work out. They're gonna open up more private prisons and they're gonna detain these migrants seeking asylum in these facilities. That's what they're gonna do. Look, that's my speculation. And that speculation is well informed based on what administrations have done in the past. It's just not a good sign because I don't think that this is the correct solution to our migrant crisis. I'm not one of these people who has my head in the sand and doesn't acknowledge that there is a migrant crisis. There is. But I feel that that is partly the result of our broken immigration system. The fact that we don't have enough immigration judges to process asylum seekers quickly. The fact that we are not creating a pathway to citizenship for the undocumented immigrants who happen to be in the country and have been in the country for quite some time now. There's a lot of reform that needs to take place, and that reform can't happen unilaterally at the executive branch. That reform needs to happen in Congress. But Congress is too busy with their faux investigations, with their speakership ousters, with their nonsense drama and their theatrical hearings to actually pass legislation that would reform a broken immigration system. And I have a huge problem with that. Now, it sounds like we are gonna go back to relying more and more on private facilities to detain migrants. And administration officials and some Senate Democrats have also previously indicated a willingness to raise the initial screening standard for so-called credible fear interviews that migrants have to pass to avoid being deported under expedited removal. So again, I wanna really emphasize the fact that I don't think that this is something that Biden doesn't want and he's pressured into it because he has no choice. He's got to get that military funding to Ukraine and Israel. First of all, the military funding to Israel should really be questioned entirely, considering the war crimes that are being committed right now, and considering the fact that the Israeli government humiliates Joe Biden almost on a regular basis by telling the world stage that they have no intention of allowing for a Palestinian state. They have no intention to dial back their military operations that have slaughtered tens of thousands of innocent Palestinian civilians. And then the situation with Ukraine, I think, is a little complicated too. I'm far more willing to provide some support to Ukraine, but there really needs to be a strategy in place. We need to know what the strategy is to defeat Russia. And it just feels like there's a growing number of lawmakers, certainly on the right, but even Democratic lawmakers who are questioning whether simply writing blank checks to Ukraine is the right way to ensure that there's peace in the end and that Ukraine has some victory. And remember, Biden's considerations for more stringent immigration policies are upsetting some core members of his voting base. That includes immigration or migrant advocates, progressive Democrats, and also Latino lawmakers. For now, the White House is claiming that Biden is considering compromises, and that doesn't mean that all of those compromises will be implemented. But honestly, I think they will. And why do I think they will? Because I think Biden actually does want more restrictive immigration policies because the migrant crisis is hurting him politically. So let's get to that. The migrant crisis has been impacting, as I said earlier, some of the blue cities that Biden would need to clinch the 2024 presidential election. Voters, many of them who happen to be people of color, have been pretty furious about the meager resources that they were already dealing with, but now those resources they feel are being diverted to migrants. So Chicago in particular is currently working on building a winterized tent shelter for migrants, and the local community is pretty furious about it.
The Brighton Park facility drawing backlash from Chicago residents at a heated community meeting last week.
What does housing look like for our own residents who are houselessness, who need affordable housing, our seniors, those resources that asylum seekers are getting in one place? Our residents have to go multiple places for.
Officials warning Chicago is approaching a breaking point. Tents full of desperate migrants lining Chicago's iconic Lakeshore Drive. Migrant shelters inside O'Hare Airport. A total of 17,000 migrants showing up since last August, and officials expect 1,200 per day to keep coming. Democratic Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker slamming President Biden for not doing enough, writing, "The federal government's lack of intervention and coordination at the border has created an untenable situation for Illinois." The White House blaming Congress for not acting and saying they've accelerated work permits and provided $1 billion to cities nationwide.
I don't want them there.
But protests here are growing.
To have the government come in and dump 300 people right next door to me, it is not fair.
So again, this is a political liability for Biden. And look, I think that it is to some extent unfair to place all the blame on Biden. I think the bulk of the blame is on Congress. Congress is supposed to pass legislation. They are supposed to reform the immigration system, and they have failed to do so. relying on the executive branch to handle this issue unilaterally is not the right way to go about it. And that's what we've been relying on for multiple administrations now. It's insane. And by the way, get a load of the transparent reporting touching on Democrats and their political interests in New York City. So let's watch.
The growing migrant crisis here in New York City may put new pressure on President Joe Biden's re-election bid when it comes to big-time fundraising. The situation has some people riled up throughout the city and across New York State.
Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez struggled to make her point amid all that chanting after she and Representative Adriano Espaillat led members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus through a tour of the Roosevelt Hotel, a location housing hundreds of asylum seekers. Outside, all that shouting from the sidelines came from people frustrated with New York's status as a sanctuary city. Within the last year, 100,000 migrants crossed the southern border, relocating to New York City. The city is still providing services to 60,000 people.
These people are cutting the line, and as long as you continue to grant them free stuff, you're never going to stop the crisis at the border.
So you get why I feel that the pressure from Republicans to implement hardline immigration policies is something that Biden might actually want to implement, but he doesn't want the ire of progressive Democrats, so he's pretending like he doesn't, and he's being forced to do it. But he's got to keep in mind that a lot of these progressive Democrats that he's trying to, protect himself from any criticism from don't really support the military funding that he's saying that he needs to engage in compromises for. So the polling doesn't look good for Biden either on this immigration matter. A Reuters Ipsos poll concluded in September found that a majority of Americans, 54%, agreed with the statement that immigration is making life harder for native-born Americans. Of course, there's a big difference between Democrats and Republicans. Some 73% of Republicans and 37% of Democrats surveyed agreed with the statement. 37% of Democrats is far too high compared to what we've seen from Democratic voters in the past. And so when you consider that, when you consider how much trouble Biden is in swing states like Michigan, where you have a sizable Arab population that is not happy with his handling in the Gaza Strip, I think he's trying to find ways to fix some of the issues that are leading to low approval ratings for Joe Biden. And so Biden's more restrictive immigration policies, by the way, if he does in fact implement everything I listed earlier, might not even be enough for the far right Republican caucus in the House, because right now he's negotiating with senators. That's where Democrats still hold control in Congress. But in the House of Representatives, it's an entirely different situation. House Speaker Mike Johnson is further right than most Republican lawmakers, if you can believe it. The House of Representatives also has the House Freedom Caucus. They're further to the right. And so House Republicans earlier this year actually passed a bill known as HR 2, and that includes stricter asylum and border provisions, including the reinstatement of migrant family detention. It's so sick. And the so-called remain in Mexico policy, which I believe Biden is still implementing as we speak. But it also included drastic limits on the humanitarian parole authority, which the Biden administration has used to welcome hundreds of thousands of refugees and migrants from Afghanistan, a country we bombarded and destroyed, certain Latin American countries, Haiti and Ukraine. So look, I feel that immigration is such an important part of the fabric of this country. And I am not in any way against allowing for migrants to come in. I do think our system is broken, though. I do think that we, need security at the border to some extent, but also need to find a way to process asylum seekers quickly and fairly. That takes resources, that takes reforms, that takes real legislation and real debate in Congress. And I don't have much hope that we're gonna get that. I hate to say it, but right now it just seems like a political football, and Biden's playing the game.
Thanks for watching the video, guys. We also love it if you hit the join button below, because that makes you a member, and members allow us to be independent, honest. We can be as progressive as we want, no corporate media influence, and that's all because of you guys. We love doing the show with our members. Hit the join button, become one of the Young Turks.